Hello, friends. Welcome to Spirit Reports of Life After Life by Allan Kardec. We're basing our studies every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Heaven and Hell. It is actually the second part of Heaven and Hell, where Allan Kardec gifts us with those beautiful case studies. It is like reality TV. We're learning every week of how to conduct ourselves today, to prepare ourselves today for our transition. Because one thing is for sure, we will all have to leave our physical form behind. Right, friends? So we may as well get busy ourselves today and prepare ourselves for this beautiful moment that will come sooner or later. So for the last few months, we've studied the happy spirits, and from them we learned a lot of lessons of how to do things, how to work on our inner transformation. And in the last couple of weeks, we've transitioned to the chapter of average spirits. And from the average spirits, we not only learn some things we should do or could do, but also some things we might want to avoid, because these beautiful spirits are so wise now that they're telling us of what worked for them and what doesn't. So this week, dear friends, we will be talking about Mr. Cardon, who was a doctor, a physician. So if you like to move along in Heaven and Hell along with me, we're starting on page 328. And before we start, I want to say hello to our dear friends, our community. It is so lovely to have people here. I'm not sure I can see everyone, so please forgive me if I don't mention your name, but I want to say hi to Tony. Thank you, Tony, for joining. Tony is a member of Bethea Spiritual Healing Center, and he also attends some meetings at Divine Light Spiritist Center here in Northern California. And there's Teresa. Hello, dear friend. Nice to see you. And I see other friends, but I don't see names. So please feel hugged and welcomed by me. And today, let us close our eyes, if we can, for just a moment. And let us be aware of being in our physical forms, our bodies. And let us open our hearts. And let us connect with our minds and link our minds up with our Mother, Father, God, our beloved Jesus, guide and model. And also open our hearts to the divine wisdom, to Jesus, Mother Mary. And it is with so much gratitude in our hearts to also Allan Kardec and Kardec Radio for having this beautiful platform every single day, 24 hours of the day, where we can meet and connect and harmonize our hearts and minds to study, to learn, to prepare ourselves, to turn ourselves towards the good every breath of the way. And we're humbly asking for permission to start tonight's study group. And so be it. All right, dear friends, let us get started. So Mr. Cardon, page 328, he was a doctor. So he was also, before he became a doctor, he was a merchant marine. And then later on, he became a country doctor. And he describes himself, or he is being described as a materialistic person. So matter was important for him. And he developed an illness, and it's an illness of the heart. It's called hypertrophy. I believe that's the way it's being pronounced. Correct me if I'm wrong. It has something to do with an enlargement of muscles. There's some enlargement that's not healthy going on, and it may lead to death. And in this case, and at that age, at that time in human history, it did. And so he diagnosed himself with that illness. And he said, and Allan Kardec says here, and knowing that the illness was incurable for him, he sank into a state of inconsolable melancholy at the prospect of dying. So this is an interesting moment just to realize that when we are very materialistically inclined, we don't exercise any, we don't study about life after life, if we don't have any belief in a higher being, this is very often what's happening. I've seen it myself with people around me passing on. So he fell into this depression, we can say, and nobody could cheer him up. Approximately 2 months before his death, he actually predicted the day on which he would die. Then, when the time came, he gathered his family around him to say his final farewell. His wife, mother, 3 children, and other relatives were gathered at his bedside. So just picture that. So here he is lying, Mr. Cardon is lying on a bed, and his whole family is surrounding him. At his wife's first attempt to lift him up, he went limp and turned a livid purple. It's pretty drastic, right? Can be pretty scary. His eyes closed and he was thought to be dead. His wife placed herself in front of him to prevent the children from seeing him. So she covered him up in a way because she was worried about her children's reaction to their dad turning purple. After a few minutes, he reopened his eyes, however, and his appearance became luminous, so to speak, and filled with an expression of radiant beatitude. He exclaimed, "Oh, my children, it's beautiful. It's sublime. Oh, death, what a blessing. What a sweet thing. I was dead and I felt my soul rise up very high, but God allowed me to return in order to tell you, do not fear death at its deliverance." Friends, the family that gathered around Mr. Cardon are we. We are around him and we're learning from him. He had a near-death experience. So he left his body turned purple, and he experienced the first glimpses of what happens after our leaving the body. Now, there is a society in the United States, and I think they're in the East Coast, and they're called IANS. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANS. And there's many books written about this, and they have regular meetings, and most of the participants are people who've had near-death experiences. So it's a real thing, and we can actually learn a lot from reading their books and their accounts. So Mr. Cardon was blessed with that experience himself, and even though he was completely desolate and we want to say depressed when he knew that he had to die, so to speak, after that experience, after this blessing that he received from God, he turned around and he saw how beautiful it is to transition, what a gift it is. And he says, do not fear death, it is deliverance. And this is a message for us tonight, to take to heart, to not have any fear. We can prepare ourselves today, starting today. We can learn from these spirits. We can read the books from the near-death experience people. It is really not as bad as we might think. So he continues to say, I cannot possibly describe the magnificence of all I saw, the impressions that I experienced. You would not comprehend them. Oh, my children, always conduct yourselves. And now he goes into, and this is interesting, and again, let us imagine for a moment that we are his children and we are surrounding Mr. Cardon in his final moments, because we are the ones now who are learning from his wisdom, from his account. And this is our blessed opportunity. Thanks to the spirits on high, thanks to Mr. Cardon, and thanks to Allan Kardec, who put these cases together in this book, Heaven and Hell. What a blessing, right, friends? So he says now, and we're learning from him, oh, my children, always conduct yourselves in such a way that you will merit the ineffable happiness reserved for righteous men. Live according to the precepts of charity. We're supposed to live according to the precepts of charity. He says, if you have anything, always give a part of it to those who lack the necessities of life. Friends, charity, if we have anything, even just a smile, a pat on the shoulders, a minute of our days, so little is needed to be charitable. If we can share, maybe we can make a list of all the things we have, the wealth that surrounds us, that we incorporate in this lifetime, and then say, okay, I will share a little bit of each and every single thing I have in my possession. And it can start with a good thought. And now he goes and teaches us and his family too at that time of what he meant by charity. And then we will look and see what Allan Kardec explained about charity. Right, friends? So let us see. He says, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a pretty long case, but we're going to summarize. So he says, I beg you not to bound yourselves to debtors. Well, we may think today, well, there aren't any debtors, but we have credit cards, right? We can have a lot of debt even today. So here's our invitation to not bound ourselves to debtors, because what's behind that is the need to have always something more. It's really not a need, it's a want, right? And sometimes it could be seen as a little greedy, that we may be a little greedy. We want more and more, even beyond our means, instead of sharing the little that we may have. So do not bind yourselves to debtors. Then he says, forgive them, forgive everyone, and the debtors, forgive them. And he says, work to support your parents. So where are we at in that? We're invited to support our elders. And it's not just our blood family, it's also our spiritual family, it's our universal family. So are we taking care of our elders? Are we supporting them? Then he says, be honest. Avoid doing anything that might dishonor you. So honesty, integrity. Then he says, help each other and mutually support one another. Always lead, give, invite, lend a helping hand. Let us always lend a helping hand. Then he says, harmony. Develop harmony in yourselves, in ourselves. Then he says, don't be vain or proud. Don't be vain or proud. And forgive your enemies. Beautiful, friends, right? And then he says, forgive your enemies, and that is the degree to which God will forgive you. So it is just like in the prayer of St. Francis. Instead of us sitting back and saying, well, I want to be forgiven, I deserve to be loved, I deserve this, that, and the other. It is so much more powerful, and we're invited by Jesus and St. Francis, who was a Christ-conscious being, to rather give what we would like to receive. Because then by giving love, by giving forgiveness, by giving benevolence and indulgence, we receive it ourselves. Because by giving, we receive. So here's Mr. Cardon teaching us the same thing. Then he says, yes, so after this lesson, he goes, let me just see for a moment, where are we here? So charity, yes. And then after he gives this lesson, and again we're repeating, he says, do not bind yourself to debtors, forgive, support, be honest, help each other, live in harmony, don't be proud or vain, forgive. So then signaling them to come closer, his family to come closer, he takes their hands and adds, bless you, my children. And his eyes closed for good. His face, however, retained such a stately expression that up until the moment of his funeral, crowds of people viewed it with wonder. He was truly touched, caressed by the divine love, and he radiated it out. And by the gift from Jesus and the good spirits, he was able to release his bad mood, to release his melancholy and turn it into joy and love. And he left this earth by teaching this final important lesson. So charity is one of the main lessons that Mr. Cardon is teaching us about tonight, is inviting us to revisit. And yes, this is nothing new. We know about that. We know how important charity is, that it's really at the core, it should be at the core of our lives. But we believe it's always good to revisit the same lessons over and over again, because we change, we're different from day to day, and we may hear different aspects of what the teachings bring to us tonight. So we know that in charity, all of Jesus's lessons, morals, are summed up in, and that it is charity and humility that sum up all of Jesus's lessons, all of his morals, all of his moral teachings. So Mr. Cardon goes right into the core of what Jesus brought to this planet. So then we also know that what is the antidote? What is the extreme opposite to selfishness? What are the two things that prevent us from being charitable? Friends, do you remember? There's two things that do not allow us to share, to be kind, to be benevolent, indulgent, and forgiving. Yes, I'm sure you know it. I'm going to say it now. Selfishness and pride. So being proud, pride feeds selfishness. They feed off of each other. So that's the destructive part in us that prevents us from actually living what Jesus brought to this planet and teaches us. So let us go for a moment to the Spirit's book, question 886. And you may remember what that question is all about. We have gone there many times. I'm sure you have gone there many times. But we thought it would be good to just hear it one more time in its clarity, in its detail. It's question 886, which is in the third part of the Spirit's book. And it is in the third part where Allan Kardec helps us to understand the divine laws, natural law or divine law. And I have heard friends like Carol Correa and our dear friend Vanessa Anzalone call it the constitution of our soul, because it is the ultimate guideline. We all fall under God's laws, and I love that expression. So that's why I'm borrowing it from them. So in the part 3, chapter 11, we find the most important divine law, which is the law of charity. No, I can't think. It's the law of charity. My mind is going numb. Well, we'll find it. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so question 886. So what is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood? And here's the answer. Benevolence towards everyone. Now, what is benevolence? The Latin origin is bene, which is good, and volere is doing, goodwill, is willing, is doing good. Benevolence is goodwill towards all. And how can we practice goodwill in the most perfect way? Where does it start, friends? Yes, it starts in our thinking. It is our thoughts. And from our thoughts, we create feelings, and feelings feed more thoughts. And if we don't have kind, benevolent thoughts, we can't have kind and benevolent words or actions. So we need to work on our thinking. And then he says, so it's benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards the imperfections of others. Indulgence, not honing in to the one or two things that we don't like in people, but rather see the bigger picture, see the good in people. There's always something good in every single person. And then lastly, let us not forget that the law of projection dictates that if we spot it, we've got it. What does that mean? When we spot it, we've got it. It's something in us that we have disowned or we don't see. It's the proverbial blind spot. And that is usually exactly what arouses our unkind thinking. Yes, friends, it is in us. We need to look back into the mirror and see. And actually, other human beings serve us beautifully, particularly the so-called difficult ones, because they show us, they hold up the mirror and say, hey, sunshine, here, look at this corner and look at that cobweb, right? So anyway, indulgence towards the imperfections of others, and lastly, forgiveness for offenses. And as Mr. Cardon has taught us already, we can only be forgiven to the degree that we forgive. So love and charity supplement the law of justice, because loving our neighbors is to do them all the good possible, Allan Kardec tells us. And then we're moving on to question 288. There is a second part, and we're just jumping right to that. And it's in the same chapter. And here, Allan Kardec, no, wait a minute. It's actually not Allan Kardec. It is, this part is from St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul tells us now that true charity is always good and benevolent. And we learned from the good spirits, the happy spirits, earlier in the last couple of months, that the most important charity is the charity that is expressed by benevolence. Yes, so here it is again. True charity, St. Vincent de Paul tells us, is always good and benevolent. It is demonstrated both in the act itself and in the way it is done. A service rendered with graciousness thus has a double value, but if it is rendered with haughtiness, the recipient's need compels him or her to accept it, but his or her heart will hardly be touched. So there it is, we need to be humble. When we serve, when we are charitable, it needs to come from a place of being humble, not thinking we're better, because we're all children under the one beautiful, benevolent God. Right, friends? We're all equal. Also remember that in God's sight, ostentation erases the merit of benevolence. So this is another layer. Not only are we invited to be humble when we share what we have, but we're also invited not to tell everyone on social media or texting or our friend circle of friends or co-workers, oh, look what I've done. Look at me, how great I am. Right, friends? So it is, as Jesus taught us, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, right? That is part of being humble. That is part of being non-ostentatious. Therein he teaches you not to tarnish charity with pride. And we just learned earlier that pride and selfishness are the antidote to charity. So let us now go to the gospel. And there we find Sister Rosalie. Sister Rosalie, lovely, lovely message on page 223 in the gospel, according to Spiritism, which is, which is in chapter 13. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And Sister Rosalie very wisely teaches us, makes a distinction between two types of charities. She talks about the material charity and the moral charity. So see, we're learning another layer about charity. So first of all, she stresses the golden rule. She reminds us to do unto others as we would like them to do unto us. So that is always, we can never go wrong with that. And from my perspective, that is kind of the bottom line for our Christ consciousness. So if we focus on that and we can remember during the day just the golden rule, we're already really deeply working on our inner transformation. So she reminds us of that too. And then she says that the material charity is giving alms and that there is nothing wrong with that. Giving alms is great. She says, help unfortunates as much as you can. Give so that one day God will repay the good you have done. But there is another form of charity that is even more important, and that is the moral charity. And now she's going to explain to us a little bit of what she understands that to be. She says it consists in giving support to one another. Now we could say, yeah, cooking a meal for someone is giving support, right? But that would fall more under the material charity. But here she says then, and it is what you practice the least on the low order world where you are incarnate for now. So she puts us into our right place to keep us humble, right? She says, well, this kind of moral charity of supporting each other is not something we do very well on earth. So we need to work on that, obviously. This is the one that may be the most difficult and not always convenient, right, friends? So that's the hard part. So then she says, here are some examples. Keep quiet and let a more ignorant person speak is an example that she's giving us for the moral charity. And then she says, knowing how to turn a deaf ear when a mocking word escapes is another example. And not paying any attention to the smirk of disdain. Turning the other cheek, returning good for evil. Right, friends? So these are some examples that she's showing us. And all right, yeah. So Sister Rosalie is really helpful in making a distinction of guiding us, steering us towards the moral charity. And of course, there's many, many more examples. And as we said, it starts with our thinking, our benevolent thoughts. So let us see, where are we? Yeah, and then if we continue on in the Gospel according to Spiritism, we go to the chapter, without charity there is no salvation. Right? Another really important, beautiful chapter that teaches us so much about charity and the antidote, which is not without charity without charity there is no salvation, but without the church there is no salvation. But we're not going to go there right now. We're focusing on the without charity there is no salvation, because that brings us all together as brothers and sisters under one God. It unites us. It helps us to love each other, one another more. So that's why we're looking at that. And here Allan Kardec, oh wait, is it Allan Kardec? Let me double check. Yeah, it's Allan Kardec who tells us, while the maxim without charity there is no salvation is based on a universal principle and gives all God's children access to supreme happiness. It is beautiful, right? Because it is something we all can practice. Because we all, every single person, even the poorest person on this planet, has a smile to give, right, friends? Or a kind thought. We don't need anything material to be charitable, to practice this moral charity. We don't need anything. We can even, there's an example I saw on Facebook of a man who was dying of cancer, and he was in the hospital on chemo, and he had not much longer to live. And what did he do? He crocheted hats for children who went through chemo. So there's always something we can do, right? So let's see. Yes, so this maxim, without charity there is no salvation, is consecrated to the principle of equality before God. With this maxim as a rule, all men and women are brothers and sisters. Beautiful, right, friends? So we're invited to practice charity from all ends. So, page 259, one more. Let's see what that is. Oh yeah, here's Apostle Paul. He says, submit all your actions to the test of charity, and your conscience will respond to you. And where's God's law written, dear friends? How do we know we're doing the good? It's in our conscience. So all we need to do is tune in and listen. And then we know whether we have submitted all of our actions to charity. And then finally, Apostle Paul says, for all who practice charity are Jesus' disciples, whatever the denomination to which they belong. right? Another invitation to not get hung up of who is Catholic, who is Jewish, who is this or the other. No, as long as we're doing good, as long as we are being charitable, we're on the right path, right, friends? It opens our hearts further. So now let us go back to Mr. Cardon, and let us see what he has. One more lesson for us, and let's see what that is. Where are we? Yes, he's being asked. Now he passed on, he transitioned, and after a little while, he is being evoked. And now he's in the spirit world, and he's being asked, are you now enjoying the happiness you foresaw at the time of your near-death experience? And the answer is no. Interesting, right? So Mr. Cardon doesn't have the same happiness now that he has actually died as he experienced when he just had a glimpse of the spirit world. He says, I would certainly love to enjoy it, but God can't reward me that much. I too often revolted against the blessed thoughts my heart dictated to me, and death seemed like an injustice. So this is the beautiful thing about this chapter now, that we are also learning of what not to do. Not just what to do to have a wonderful time on the other side. Hello, Soul. Just wanted to say hi. So nice to have you here. Just seeing that you joined. Thank you, dear friend. So we're also learning to not to revolt, but to surrender to God's will and not push up against, and also to not see death as an injustice, death of our physical form as an injustice ever, and not just for us, our own selves, but also deaths that we observe on the news, in the world in general, but to know that there is no injustice, right, friends? So when we go to question 159 in the Spirit's book, we see that, let's see, question 159. Here we are. Allan Kardec very wisely in chapter 3, the return to the corporeal, from the spirit life to the corporeal world, asked the following question. Let's make sure. Question 159. What sensation does the soul experience at the moment it realizes that it is in the spirit world, right? Because that is really what Allan Kardec asked the spirit. Now, are you happy? And the answer is, no, not as happy as I thought I would be after my first glimpse. And here is the answer that the spirits on high gave to Allan Kardec. That depends. So what sensations we're feeling, that depends. If it has done evil for the love of it, so if the person has done evil for the love of it, the spirit is at first ashamed of what it has done. However, it experiences something completely different if it has been morally upright. It feels relieved of a great weight because it does not fear the most scrutinizing glance. Again, an invitation for us to start doing the good or continue doing the good right now, so that later on when we go to the other side, we will not recoil from the scrutiny that our own conscience will impose on us or will get us through. So if we're doing the good, we will have an easier time. It's all in our power, and that's really good news, isn't it? This is the good news for tonight. It is all in our hands. So then, let us go back. Then he says, a disbelieving physician, he's talking about himself, a disbelieving physician. I acquired in the art of healing an aversion towards the second nature, which is our intelligent divine impulse. For me, the immortality of the soul was nothing more than a fiction fit to seduce the uneducated. Wow. And yet nothingness frightened me. So see, this is very interesting for us to see the pitfalls of a primarily materialistically inclined person. Denying that there is a spirit, denying that there is the immortality of the soul, denying that there is life after life, and as a matter of fact, even displaying some pride and saying, all of this is just humbug. It's just the belief for the uneducated, right, friends? So this is a lesson of how not to conduct our lives. So let us move on. Then Alan Kardec asks whether he was at all knew right away where he was. And he's told that it took him a few days to awaken. So the state of confusion that we've studied before is something that he experienced as well. Then he talks about the fact that God granted him a favor by having this near-death experience, but that the favor didn't go so far as for him to be actually a happy spirit because of the revolt, because of his denial of anything spiritual in his lifetime, because of his attachment to materialism. The idea of God is as vast as the universe, he's now teaching us. Oh, what supreme consolation there is in prayer. And here we are moving into the second lesson for tonight that Mr. Cardon is giving us. So first one is charity, the next one is prayer. Prayer arouses ineffable sentiments, which is ineffable is like inexpressible sentiments. It is the most positive element of our non-material nature. It is the most positive element of our non-material nature. Through prayer, I understood, I believed firmly and supremely, and that is why God, in weighing my good deeds, rewarded me before the end of my incarnation. So see, friends, this is an average spirit. So there is some good in his life, and then there is some more unconscious aspects of his life. But since he also had good aspects, God granted him, based on his merit, this glimpse of the spirit world, which really propelled him towards understanding the bigger picture much better and leaving this planet by giving not only his own family, but even us a beautiful lesson. So let us move forward to another question that Allan Kardec asks. He says, you stated that you are not presently enjoying the happiness you foresaw, right? So he's not as happy as he at first thought he would be and what he experienced in that moment of getting a glimpse from the other side. May we conclude that you are unhappy? So Allan Kardec would like to know now, if he's not really happy, is he unhappy? And the answer is no, since I became a believer in both heart and conscience before I died. Pain afflicts us while on earth, and we know about that, right, friends? But it strengthens us from the point of view of our future as spirits. Yes, pain strengthens us. Notice that God took into account my prayers. God took into account my prayers and the absolute faith I had in him. I am firmly on the path of perfection and will someday reach the end that I was allowed to glimpse. So he's completely at peace, it sounds like, that the beauty, the indescribable experience he had of wholeness and happiness as a result of his near-death experience is something he has not merited to be dwelling in as yet. But he does know that he will be working on it, and he is on his path. And prayer and charity are two things that will help him along. Pray, my friends, he says, for this invisible world that presides over your destinies. This sort of fraternal exchange comes from charity, and here it ties in. Prayer and charity is like a circle. It is connected. One leads to the other and vice versa. So let's repeat the sentence. It says, pray, my friends, for this invisible world that presides over your destinies. This sort of fraternal exchange comes from charity. It is a lever that puts spirits of all worlds in communication. Let us go, friends, let us go to the Gospel according to Spiritism, to a protector spirit. On page 224, we're getting a little bit more information. Let us see, page 224. What a gift. Thank you, Allan Kardec. I hope you've seen the movie already. It is so touching. It is so wonderful to see Allan Kardec alive, so to speak. It brings him closer to us. It makes him more human. It opens our hearts. It's a beautiful movie, very well worth watching, and maybe watching even several times. So page 224, chapter 13, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And this is by a protector spirit. And he says, charity, my friends, may be practiced in many ways. You can practice charity in thought, word, and deed. Now you're wondering, why are we going back to charity? Because it ties into the prayer aspect. So we can practice in charity in thought, in word, and in deed. And of course it starts with our thinking, right friends? So then he says, in thought, by praying for the forsaken poor who have died without having even seen the light. A prayer from the heart will console them. So we're learning we can pray, and it is a form of charity. And this is what Mr. Cardon is teaching us as well. So if we should pray always. Pray to the invisible world. Pray to God, to Jesus, to the helper spirits, to the spirit doctors, to communicate with our own mentors and spirit guides. So he says, so prayer, by providing your everyday companions some good advice. So by praying, we provide our everyday companions with some good advice. Another form of charity is prayer, and we can always pray. Even when we see homeless or people suffering on the streets and we pass by and we can't stop in the moment, we can always speak a little prayer, right friends? So now, let us continue over to prayer. We know when we go to the Spirit's book, we learn that prayer is an act of worship. Prayer is an act of worship. And what happens when we pray? Because Mr. Cardon is very, very strong in guiding us towards praying more. So we learn, what does worship entail? So what does prayer entail? This is question 649 in the Spirit's book. Worship is the lifting up of the thought towards God. There we go again. See? It is, we can give charity through thought, speech, and deed. And prayer is one form. It is our lifting, our connection of our thought with God. Through worship, the soul draws nearer to its Creator. So then we're wondering, we're learning from chapter 27 in the Gospel according to Spiritism on prayer. Prayer is an invocation. By means of prayer, we communicate through thought with the being to whom the prayer is addressed. Again, prayer is an invocation, and it connects our thoughts with the higher world. And it can also connect our thoughts to others by sending them goodwill, benevolence, indulgence, forgiveness, love, support, a form of charity via prayer, our connection with our thoughts. Then we go back to the Spirit's book, question 654, still under the law of worship, which our sister Cal Coher did so beautifully. We learned so much from that. And here, we're learning of how to pray. So we know that we need to pray, and now we're wondering, how do we best pray? And Allan Kardec wondered about the same thing, and he asks, does God have any preference for those who worship in this or that manner? And the answer is, God prefers those who sincerely worship from the bottom of their hearts, doing good and avoiding evil to those who think they honor God through ceremonies and the like. So here's another component, our heart connection. Yes, we connect our thoughts, but we also connect our hearts with God and the Supreme Being and Jesus, heart to heart. The next question is 658. Is prayer pleasing to God? And we know the answer, friends, right? Of course, a prayer is always pleasing to God when spoken from the heart again. For intent is everything to God. Again, the heart. We're linking our thoughts to God from the heart. Question 660. Does prayer make people better? Yes, because those who pray fervently and confidently strengthen themselves against the temptations of evil. So it is another aspect of prayer. It is also a protector. It's a shield. It's a shield for us from unconscious, less conscious spirits. Let us see. Yes, and so now we're getting a little bit more information in chapter 27 in the Gospel, and that is on page... It is actually the same chapter that we had before when we learned that prayer is an invocation. And in chapter 27, we also learned that we need to forgive before we pray. Why is that, friends? Why do we need to forgive before we pray? Well, we just learned that in order to pray most effectively, we need to pray from the heart. Now, if we hold rancor and anger and resentment towards other people, and we can't forgive, guess what? Our heart closes up, right? So how can we really have our hearts open and connect to the divine if we're holding on to these lower sentiments, to these feelings that prevent us from opening our hearts? And so it only makes sense that we need to forgive before we pray, because then our prayers will be ever so more effective from the heart. Okay, dear friends, let us go back to Mr. Cardon and wrap up this chapter. So there are two main lessons we're learning tonight from him, and that is charity and prayer. And prayer is a form of charity, so they are linked, which is so beautiful. So then he says, the last question he's being asked is, do you perchance wish to say a few words to your wife and children? And he does. And again, we are invited to be the wife and children, to be the ones who are listening, who are sitting by him as a spirit, the moment of invocation, to learn from him. He says, I would ask them all to believe in the powerful, just, and immutable God. So let us believe in a just and powerful, immutable God. In prayer, which consoles and relieves, again, let us believe in prayer. Let us pray more, not less, from the heart, connecting our minds with the divine. In charity, which is the purest practice of human incarnation. Charity, the purest practice of human incarnation. And that they remember that we can always give a little, at least. We can always give something, dear friends. The alms which the poor give are more meritorious before God, who knows that they give much when they give a little. The rich must give a lot and repeatedly in order to merit as much. Very good advice, right, friends? The future lies in the charity and benevolence of each action, he says. The future lies in the charity and benevolence, and we know that benevolence is part of charity, goodwill, of each action. Each action we are asked to be charitable, benevolent, good-willed. And in the belief that all spirits are family, and that we should never let childish vanities prevail. Friends, what a beautiful invitation we're getting on a Sunday night, on the eve of a new week, where we can practice these beautiful lessons. And then we're closing right now, friends. We're closing this chapter and this lesson, this gathering tonight. And hello, Lisa, I'm seeing you. And Carol Coher is here, dear friend. Thank you so much for joining. How beautiful. And let us close tonight's gathering with a prayer that actually Mr. Cardon offered to us, offered to his family, something that was part of his message that he brings at the end of the chapter. And we're invited, if we can, to close our eyes for a moment, to, if we can, to feel our feet grounded on the soil, on the ground, so we're connected to Mother Earth. And let us open our hearts wide, feeling the love of the divine, and open our minds towards the beautiful words and the lessons that Mr. Cardon offered to us tonight. And we're connecting with God and Jesus, our guide and model, and with the love that we are enveloped in 24/7 all the time. And here we're listening to Mr. Cardon praying, and he says, God of love and goodness, who grants all things, give us greater strength to bear all our ups and downs, and enable us to be good, humble, and charitable, small of fortune, but great of heart. Grant that we may be spiritists while on earth, so that we might comprehend and love you more. May your name, O my God, emblem of freedom, be the consoling aim of all who are oppressed, of all who need to love, forgive, and believe. Dear Mother, Father, God, beloved Jesus, and all the beautiful spirits on high, the healing doctors, our mentors, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for this beautiful lesson, for this reminder for us to renew our commitment to prayer and charity, the moral charity, the charity that expresses itself most and foremost through benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. And it is with incredible gratitude also to Allan Kardec and his committed, beautiful work that we may sit here today and meet in this intercontinental classroom, united in mind and heart to learn these lessons, to practice and prepare ourselves for our future in this incarnation, our future out of our bodies, and our future incarnations. And with this, we humbly ask for permission to close tonight's gathering. And so be it, dear friends. Thank you so much for joining. So much love to everyone. Thank you, dear friends. And so God willing, we will meet again next Sunday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, with another case of an average spirit. God bless you, dear friends. Thank you.